Shortly before 9 o'clock on the night of June 7th, both Maggie and Paul Murdaugh were shot dead near the dog kennels on the Moselle property. Maggie was shot multiple times with a rifle. Paul was shot twice with a shotgun at close range. The ferocity of the attack, particularly on Paul, was something investigators described as intensely personal. Alex Murdaugh called 911 at approximately 9:22 p.m. He told the dispatcher he had just come home and found them. He said he needed help. He gave directions to the property. His voice on that call was distressed in a way that anyone who has listened to it can hear. But investigators would later identify something in that call that became one of the central questions of the entire case. In the background of a video Paul had taken at the dog kennels approximately 20 minutes before the 911 call, voices could be heard. And one of those voices, audio analysts testified at trial, was Alex Murdaugh's. He had told investigators he had not been at the kennels that evening. He had told them he was in the house when the shooting happened. He had said he came to the kennels only after finding the bodies. The video placed him there while Maggie and Paul were still alive. When confronted with this at trial, Murdaugh changed his account. He admitted he had been at the kennels. He said he had not told investigators that originally because he was in shock and confused. He said he had found his wife and son's bodies and had been so traumatized that he simply could not account for everything he had said in those early hours. He denied killing them. He denied having any reason to kill them. He told the jury he had loved Maggie and Paul completely and that losing them had destroyed him. The prosecution's argument was built around motive, opportunity, and the video. They argue that Murdaugh had killed his wife and son to generate sympathy, to create a dramatic personal tragedy that would temporarily redirect attention from the financial crimes investigation that was bearing down on him. That he had calculated, in some dark corner of his decision-making, that the grief of a newly bereaved husband and father would buy him time. That dead victims of a mysterious murder on a rural estate would be a more manageable crisis than $9 million in stolen client funds. The defense argued this motive was absurd. That no father in any rational state of mind kills his own child to delay an embezzlement investigation. That the grief Alex displayed was real. That the prosecution's theory required a level of calculation that no amount of opioid-induced damage to a person's character could produce. But there was another death that hung over the trial. A death that had not been fully explained and that cast a long shadow over everything. In February 2019, the boat crash that killed Mallory Beach had happened with Paul Murdaugh at the wheel. He had been drunk. He had been reckless. And the civil litigation that followed the crash had begun to examine not just Paul's conduct, but the Murdaugh family's broader relationship with underage drinking, with law enforcement, and with the question of whether the family's standing had influenced how the initial investigation was handled. There were allegations that the scene had not been properly preserved. There were allegations that Paul had been allowed to leave without a proper sobriety test because of who his family was. One of those clients was the family of his housekeeper, Gloria Satterfield, who had died after a fall on the Murdaugh property in 2018. Alex had encouraged her sons to file a wrongful death lawsuit against him, had directed them to specific attorneys, had assured them the process would take care of them financially. The insurance settlements that followed, totaling more than $500,000, never reached Gloria's sons. Alex Murdaugh took it and used it to pay his debts. He had been taking care of the Satterfield family for years after their mother died in his home. He attended her funeral. He spoke warmly of her. He helped her sons navigate the legal system. And he stole every penny that the legal system produced for them. The financial crimes were moving toward exposure in the summer of 2021. Alex Murdaugh knew it. His law firm had already begun an internal investigation that had found irregularities. The walls were closing in, and he could feel them moving. On the evening of June 7, 2021, Maggie Murdaugh and her younger son Paul drove to Moselle from the family's other property on Edisto Beach. It was a Monday evening. Paul had recently been charged with boating under the influence in connection with a February 2019 boat crash that had killed a 19-year-old woman named Mallory Beach and injured several others. That case had been generating its own legal complications and its own scrutiny of the Murdaugh family. Paul had been awaiting trial on those charges. But here is the detail that makes this story something more than a legal update. The person whose conduct caused the convictions to be overturned was not a corrupt detective. It was not a lying prosecutor. It was not a scientific expert who fabricated evidence. It was the county clerk of court, a woman named Becky Hill, whose job was to manage the administrative functioning of the courthouse. A woman who, while doing that job, found herself at the center of a murder trial that had captured the attention of the entire country and made a series of decisions so improper, so brazen, and so consequential that the state's highest court described them as placing her fingers on the scales of justice. She also wrote a book about it, and she plagiarized portions of it. And she was arrested and pleaded guilty to obstruction of justice and perjury. And she is now serving probation while the man her conduct helped convict is getting a new trial. This is the complete Alex Murdaugh story. From the first phone call on that June night in 2021, through the financial crimes, through the murders, through the trial, through the clerk who corrupted it, and through the ruling that dropped yesterday and changed everything once again. It is one of the most extraordinary true crime stories of the modern era. And it is not finished. On the surface, it was everything the South Carolina establishment valued: land, family, legal standing, community roots. A name that meant something. A life that appeared to have been built properly, on the right foundations, in the right way. But underneath that surface, something had been rotting for years. Alex Murdaugh was addicted to opioids. By his own later admission, he had been taking massive quantities of prescription painkillers for a very long time, eventually reaching doses that he described in court as between 15 and 60 pills per day. The financial cost of sustaining that addiction, combined with a lifestyle that projected wealth even as debt accumulated behind the scenes, had created a crisis that his family, his colleagues, and his clients had no idea existed. Because Alex Murdaugh had been stealing from them to pay for it. Not skimming. Not borrowing with an intention to repay. Stealing. Systematically. Over the course of years. From grieving families who had come to him for help after the worst things that had ever happened to them. He created fake bank accounts in the names of real clients. He redirected settlement funds. He forged documents. He used his law firm's trusted infrastructure built on 3 generations of the Murdaugh name, as the mechanism for one of the most sustained and callous frauds against vulnerable people that South Carolina had ever seen. By the time investigators finished counting, the figure was close to $9 million taken from approximately 18 clients over roughly 2 decades. To understand what Alex Murdaugh did and who Alex Murdaugh was, you first have to understand what it meant to be a Murdaugh in the South Carolina Lowcountry. This is not a story about a random person who committed a crime and got caught. This is a story about a dynasty. About a family that had wielded legal and social power in a specific corner of America for nearly a century. About the way that kind of accumulated power shapes a person's relationship with consequences. About what happens when someone who has never been told no, who has never faced accountability, who has moved through an entire life cushioned by name and reputation and connection, finally runs out of road. The Murdaugh family had dominated the legal landscape of the South Carolina Lowcountry for 3 generations. Alex's great-grandfather had served as solicitor, the chief prosecutor, for the 14th Judicial Circuit of South Carolina. His grandfather held the same position. His father held it too. For nearly a century, if you were in legal trouble in Hampton County and the surrounding area, you were dealing with a world that the Murdaugh family had built and maintained. They ran the district attorney's office. They ran the most prominent personal injury law firm in the region. Their connections ran through every courthouse, every sheriff's department, every institution of consequence in that corner of the state. Alex Murdaugh grew up inside that world as if it were simply the natural order of things. He joined the family law firm, Peters, Tinsley, and Smith, which had deep professional and personal ties to the Murdaugh name going back decades. He built a practice in personal injury law, representing families in catastrophic injury and wrongful death cases, taking a percentage of the settlement he won for them. He was charming, well-connected, and by all professional appearances, a highly capable attorney. He and his wife Maggie lived with their two sons, Buster and Paul, at Moselle, a 1,400-acre hunting estate in Islandton that was the family's primary home and a point of considerable pride. The Beach family's attorneys had subpoenaed financial records from the Murdaugh law firm in connection with that civil case. Those financial records were the thread that, once pulled, would unravel the entire financial crime structure Alex had built. Alex knew this. He had been trying to manage the legal exposure for months. The Beach family litigation was moving forward. Discovery was producing documents. The timeline was narrowing. Prosecutors argued Maggie and Paul died because of what those documents were about to show. The jury heard 6 weeks of evidence. They deliberated for 3 hours. On March 2, 2023, they returned a verdict of guilty on all 4 counts. 2 counts of murder. 2 counts of possession of a weapon during the commission of a violent crime. Alex Murdaugh was sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. He stood before the judge and said 5 words. "I'm innocent of this." Then something happened that no one had anticipated. The defense team began investigating the conduct of a woman named Becky Hill. The Culleton County Clerk of Court had been a visible and active presence throughout the trial. She had appeared publicly. She had given media interviews. And she had, while all of that was happening, been developing a book deal. The book was titled Behind the Doors of Justice, The Murdaugh Murders. Affidavits from jurors began to emerge describing things Hill had said to them during the trial. One juror stated that Hill had told her to watch Murdaugh closely and not to be fooled by his defense. Another reported that Hill had told the jury on the day Murdaugh testified that it was going to be an epic day. A third said Hill had told them when deliberations began that this should not take us long. And one juror stated in a sworn affidavit that she had personally had doubts about Murdaugh's guilt but had voted guilty because she felt pressure by the other jurors and the atmosphere around her. Hill denied everything. Her lawyers dismissed the affidavits. She published her book. Then investigators discovered she had plagiarized portions of it. Then in May 2025, she was arrested and charged with obstruction of justice, perjury, and misconduct in office. The charges alleged she had shown sealed photographs from the trial to a reporter and lied under oath about doing so, and that she had used her official position to promote her book and had paid herself thousands of dollars from official accounts. In December 2025, Becky Hill stood in a courtroom and pleaded guilty. She was sentenced to probation. She said she was ashamed of her mistakes. The South Carolina Supreme Court examined the record of what Hill had done across 5 justices and reached a unanimous conclusion. Their ruling, handed down yesterday on May 13, 2026, used language that courts almost never use about officers of the court. They described her conduct as breathtaking. They described it as disgraceful. They said it was unprecedented in South Carolina legal history. They wrote that she had placed her fingers on the scales of justice and had denied Alex Murdaugh his constitutional right to a fair trial by an impartial jury. Yesterday, one of the most famous murder convictions in American history was thrown out. Not overturned on a technicality buried in legal paperwork. Not quietly reversed in a footnote. Thrown out unanimously by the South Carolina Supreme Court in a ruling so forceful, so blunt, and so damning that it described what happened at the original trial as breathtaking, disgraceful, and unprecedented in the entire history of South Carolina justice. The man walking back toward a new trial is Alex Murdaugh, a prominent attorney from one of the most powerful legal dynasties in the American South. A man who was convicted in March 2023 of shooting his wife Maggie and his 22-year-old son Paul in the head on a warm June evening at their sprawling low-country estate. A man who had already pleaded guilty to stealing nearly $9 million from his own clients, many of them grieving families who had trusted him to fight for them at the worst moments of their lives. A man who, by the time that 2023 murder verdict was read aloud in a packed South Carolina courtroom, had become the face of one of the most spectacular falls from grace in the history of American law. And now, as of yesterday, May 13, 2026, his murder convictions no longer exist. The man who killed Maggie and Paul Murdaugh, according to the legal record as it stands today, has not been convicted of anything. They overturned the murder convictions entirely. They vacated the life sentences. They ordered a new trial. The South Carolina Attorney General, Alan Wilson, responded within hours. He said his office would aggressively seek to retry Alex Murdaugh for the murders of Maggie and Paul as soon as possible. He was clear that the ruling did not mean Murdaugh would be released. Alex Murdaugh is still in prison. He is still serving a combined sentence of approximately 67 years for the financial crimes to which he pleaded guilty. He is not walking free. He is not going home. What he has is the right to face a new jury on the murder charges, a jury whose deliberations will not be influenced by a courthouse official whispering instructions in the hallway. But here is where the case now sits in a place of genuine, unresolved tension that makes it one of the most remarkable legal stories in the country. The evidence against Alex Murdaugh did not change with yesterday's ruling. The video from the dog kennels placing him at the scene still exists. The motive constructed by the prosecution, the financial crimes, the closing net of the Beach family litigation, the desperate need for distraction, all of that still exists. The timeline of the evening still exists. The forensic evidence still exists. None of it went away when the Supreme Court threw out the conviction. What went away was the specific verdict reached by a specific jury that had been improperly influenced by a specific court official who wanted to sell books and be famous. The new jury that hears this case will see substantially different evidence from what the first jury saw. The Supreme Court's ruling was also critical of the original trial's inclusion of extensive testimony about Murdaugh's financial crimes, saying it went far beyond what was necessary and created unfair prejudice. A retrial will be constrained in ways the original was not. The jury will hear a case that has been rebuilt within tighter legal boundaries. And on the other side of that new trial, one of two things will happen. Alex Murdaugh will be convicted again, and the families of Maggie and Paul will have their verdict restored on a foundation that cannot be challenged. Or he will be acquitted, and a question that should terrify anyone who loved those two people will be left permanently open. Who killed them? On whose land they were shot? In whose presence they spent the last minutes of their lives? Maggie Murdaugh was 52 years old. She had married into one of the most prominent families in her region and had built a life on that foundation, not knowing what the foundation was actually made of. Paul Murdaugh was 22. He had made serious mistakes in his short life, mistakes that had cost another young woman hers on a February night on the water. He was facing consequences for those mistakes. He was also someone's son, someone's younger brother, someone who had the rest of his life ahead of him before the evening of June 7, 2021 took it away. The Beach family, whose daughter Mallory died in that February 2019 boat crash, has been living alongside this case for 7 years. Their civil litigation against the Murdaugh estate was part of what exposed the financial crimes. Their pursuit of accountability for what happened to Mallory was part of what closed the financial net around Alex. They have been, in a meaningful sense, central to everything that happened. And they have watched a murder trial, a conviction, an appeal, and now an overturning, all while trying to find a version of justice for a 19-year-old who died because someone with power and a famous name got into a boat drunk. The retrial of Alex Murdaugh on the murder charges has no confirmed date as of today. The prosecution has said it wants to move as quickly as possible. The defense has said it wants time to prepare a case that it believes will end differently from the first one. The legal proceedings around the financial crimes are complete. The 67-year sentence is in place. Alex Murdaugh is in prison. But the question of whether he killed Maggie and Paul is, as of yesterday, officially unanswered by any valid court verdict. And it will remain unanswered until a new jury sits in a South Carolina courtroom and hears it again. Whether that jury reaches the same conclusion as the first one, or a different one, is something nobody on earth can predict. What is certain is that this case is not finished. It was not finished when the first verdict was read. It was not finished when the financial plea was entered. It was not finished when the appeals court rejected the first challenge. And it is not finished now, in the aftermath of a unanimous Supreme Court ruling that described the conduct of a courthouse clerk as breathtaking and unprecedented. The only people who know what happened at the Moselle dog kennels on the evening of June 7, 2021 are dead or in prison. And the legal system is about to try, for the second time, to establish the truth in a room full of strangers who were not there. Leave a comment below right now. This ruling dropped yesterday, and people are already dividing sharply on what it means. Do you believe Alex Murdaugh killed his wife and son? Do you believe the conviction was always unsafe? Do you believe a retrial can produce a fair result? This comment section is going to be one of the most active we have ever had, because this is a case where almost nobody agrees on anything. Subscribe right now so you get the update the moment the retrial date is confirmed. Because this story is moving fast, and you do not want to miss what comes next.